come to ask you how you're doing these days. Didn't come to roll no stones away, no. I come to tell you that the end is nigh. I come to prophesy, yeah.
Not funny, jokes are funny.
I'm glad it was funny, and I like when I make a joke without realizing it. That's always a win, too. So the first thing I'm going to do is read my little flowery intro
You
here.
wanted a messenger.
Can't wait.
I've
I've been like listening to all of them, and I was like, oh man, like I really can't wait for this.
Oh, that's so awesome. I'm so glad. Okay. Welcome back to Talk Fiction, the podcast dedicated to entertainment media's most overlooked underdogs, fiction writers. I'm your host, Meg Olders, author of the Waddy Award-winning novel, C. Smile, and creator of the dynamic newsletter anthology, Stock Fiction. My guest today is Michael Estrin. Michael is an award-winning novelist, humorist, journalist, podcaster, PR mechanic, amateur sleuth, and just for good measure, a lawyer. He's the author of the slacker noir novel, Not Safe for Work, a Porn Valley mystery, and creator of the best-selling Substack humor landmark, Situation Normal. I will drop links to Michael's web trail of hilarity in the show notes, but without further ado, allow me to introduce my distinguished guest, Michael J. Estrin.
Wow, thank you. Nobody uses my middle initial, so like I mean my bank does, but like that's it. So
The only reason I did is because I remember you saying something at one point that there's another Michael Estrin somewhere in the country that also writes. Is that true?
there are multiple Michael Eskrins. There is a software developer who I think is quite successful, and I get job offers for him. And we've like connected on LinkedIn, and so
Right.
like I've kind of told him, I'm like, yeah, congratulations on just being such a amazing like at your career, like congrats. And then there's another Michael Estrin who I haven't talked to, and I kind of refuse to talk to because he is a not very funny stand-up comedian in Tampa, Florida.
Ah,
And I'm like,
yeah.
no, yeah, like you are the lesser Michael Estrin.
We're not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. So I always start with just how we met each other, and I will just take it back to that first Fictionistas meeting in
Yeah.
December of 2022. I was like maybe 6 weeks old on the platform, and I showed up to that. And honestly, there's probably a half a dozen of you that I've held on to since that first meeting. So that was huge for me, just kind of in terms of gathering some people right off the bat.
I have to say, like I know that stock fiction has evolved, but at that time when you sort of started, you had a really like you were kind of just had this sort of like just writing fiction based on stock images was kind of the only thing that we knew. It was like the tip of the Meg iceberg, right?
Yes.
We didn't know what was below the surface. And I was like, God damn, like that is such a fucking creative idea. And I was like, if it's like one of those things where like I'm not a jealous person, but I always know when somebody has like when a writer has a really good idea, because it's always like, why didn't I think of that? Right? Like
Right.
I don't hang on to it. I'm not animated by that.
Clearly, you're not still upset about it.
Yeah, clearly all these years later, I haven't thought about it at all. But I was like, God damn, that is a very high concept, smart idea that is like it's really kind of like one of those things that like you can just tell like it's very internet friendly, right? Like everyone sees these stock photos, but like one person has like the vision to be like, yeah, but like what if there was a story behind every stock photo? And
Yeah.
that was just cool. So I was like, oh, I need to meet this person.
That's awesome. And you're probably like the fifth person now to tell me how awesome that idea was, which makes me have this weird guilt. I'm like, should I go back to one on this? And like, because I have really like stretched and moved and done all kinds of other stuff.
No, it's just a cool thing that you've done.
Yeah. It's still part of the oeuvre over there. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Awesome. So did you bring with you a celebration and a frustration to share with me today?
I did. I thought a lot about both of these.
Excellent.
It was weird because it was harder to come up with the celebration,
Okay.
but I'll do that one first. Not because I'm not like there's things to celebrate, but I was like, oh, like what? You're like picking the right
Yeah.
one. And for me, and maybe this is like a little bit heavy to sort of say, but like for me, it's like generally just like having good mental health at this moment is a huge celebration. I've like always struggled with depression, but this year was a particularly rough year at the beginning. And it's definitely turned a corner, thanks in large part, I think, to like for the first time getting on using antidepressants, but finding the right antidepressant, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then all of the other like little things that people sort of tell you to do, like exercise and getting a good night's sleep. Like those things like help at the margins, but if you're not kind of like digging in, I've found for me anyway, if I'm not like getting to the core of it,
Yeah.
then the things at the margins, they're helpful, but they don't stick.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm finding now, really for the first time in my life is, and this is the celebration, I think, is like, it's the first time in my life where I've kind of like, I've sort of turned the corner from like a depressive moment where I'm like, oh, I have like real tools and fortifications against this kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, whereas always before I was just like, oh, like, well, it's kind of the whims of like whatever. And now I'm like, no, 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 no. Like now you understand like what kind of can send you in a spiral and how it's not really you. It's sort of this external thing, and you don't really have to spiral every time
Right.
that it happens. So that's a big celebration for me.
Absolutely. And I have, I'm kind of on it's not the other side of the spectrum, but I have like an anxiety issue. So like for me, I'm coming around the corner where it's like figuring out what your triggers are and just owning the thoughts as they come in and being like, okay. It's funny, I was in a group last night, a writers group, and I said, my new thing now when I start like doing the thoughts, the spinning thoughts, is I just go up wherever my husband is and I just go, I'm having a moment.
Yeah.
I just say that sentence and he knows that I'm having all the thoughts. And then we just talk for 5 minutes and I can like work through it. So it's like, yeah, it's finding tools and knowing that they're always there if you need them. And that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, and what I've also kind of found is like my whole life and career, like working with all of these things going on and not realizing just how like fucking exhausting they are, right? And so it's like
Yeah.
it just honestly addressing your depression or your anxiety or whatever it is, people tell you a lot of things about it. What they don't tell you is like it's a fucking enormous time saver. It is a real life hack to just be like, oh yeah, that's like a bag of shit that I don't have to carry anymore. I can just put
Right.
that down.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, that frees up so much time to like work on your novel or do your job or be present with your family or like whatever the thing is. So that's a celebration.
Absolutely. Cool. All right. So now we have to talk about your frustration though, now that we got all happy.
Okay, so this is going to seem so small in comparison because it is, but it's a weekly frustration. I do the shopping for our house. So I'm like, I go to the grocery store usually on the weekends, and there is always some fucker who will not return their shopping cart. And I just want to scream at these people, and I never do. I never confront them. I really, really want to, and it is always you see the evidence of it when you're trying to park, right? Like you see, like, oh yeah, that's a perfectly good space that has a shopping cart in it. Crap.
Yeah.
But then every once in a while, you see the crime in progress, right? And it's like a transgression, but I'll call it crime in progress. It's like a misdemeanor of life. When I see it in progress is like when I really get like I want to confront. And I saw one this weekend and I was just like, "Ah, fucker." And also, it's never the person who is like incapable of like physically incapable of like returning it. Like it's never a little old lady who's just like struggling to just make it through the parking lot. Like it's always somebody who is just like young and relatively strong and seemingly capable of just
Right.
doing lots of things. And they're like, I'll just leave this here because I'm an asshole. And so that's my frustration.
Yeah. The best is when they like maroon them on like the median.
Oh yeah.
Like if there's like a median between the parking spaces, they're like, I'll just park this up here so that the next person can't even get it down without risking,
And it,
crushing themselves
and it
under
takes
it.
effort to lift it up. It's not meant
Yeah.
it's not meant to go vertical, right? So it takes some effort to go vertical with your shopping cart. And like you could have just walked it back, usually 3 more yards, 5 more yards, not far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my frustration, I like to start with my frustration because then I can celebrate afterwards. And I have many, but I had to pick one. Actually, the one I wrote down is not the one I'm going to do because I've been more frustrated by something else. And social media is an ongoing frustration for me, but there's like an element of it right now that's really grinding my gears. And you're not on Instagram, are you?
I have an Instagram account and I don't have it on my phone.
Yeah.
I am on it, but I am not on it.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'm on it. It's like my one other than, Substack notes. It's like my one other social media thing because I refuse to go back to Twitter. But so there's this thing that's happening with, and this will kind of tie into like the branding stuff I want to talk with you about and just general presence. I mean, how people present themselves. There's like this new thing where, because for a while it was like the authenticity thing. It's like, that's what everybody wants. Like on TikTok, it's like, oh, just show up how you are and just be yourself and do your thing. But now what you see more and more is like people are seeing that authenticity and then they're turning it into a performance.
Mhm.
So it's like they're performing authenticity. So an example I'll give you is like there was this reel on Instagram of this mother who was like upset after work and she was crying and like her little 3-year-old daughter came in and was like showering her with like, oh, what's wrong, mommy, and what can I get for you, and I'll go get you a popsicle, and like the mom's sitting there behind her phone while it's filming crying about her bad day. I'm like, when I have a bad day, I'm not turning my goddamn phone on to film it for starters,
Yeah.
or putting my kid on like stage to like, it's so false. And then people are like eating it up, like the number of likes these things get and the attention, and it infuriates me. And then there are other ones too with like couples. They're like, look how like chill and authentic our coupledom is. Like I walk into the kitchen while my husband's cooking and I do this sexy dance for him. And I'm like, while there's a camera on?
Yeah.
Because that's weird. Because I don't usually have a camera on in my kitchen
I,
while my husband's cooking.
I don't either. But it's funny because I think it's like social media is kind of like it's a little bit still in its infancy, right? Or maybe it's like it's starting for like in terms of how long we've been using it, right? Like
Yeah, I guess it feels very old to me at this point.
but it
But yeah,
but like I don't know, I think I started using Friendster maybe 15 years ago or something. So it's like it's a teenager to me, right? Which is
yeah,
not a
sure.
great life stage.
Adolescence is bad. Yeah.
Yeah, but I kind of look at like that performative authenticity that you're talking about, and it really reminds me of like reality television, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like nobody lives like this, nobody talks like this. Like this is not how, like gym tan laundry is not a like a life operating theory, right? Like,
Right.
that's Jersey Shore, which I guess outs me as somebody who's watched Jersey Shore, but
Yeah.
like you know, but like that kind of like that's not how people are, but man, audiences just like when it first kind of came out, and for a while, people just gobbled it up because to them, scripted stuff felt inauthentic, right? By comparison,
Right.
because it was like, oh no, like there's mistakes and there's weirdness, and honestly, they're just sitting around looking at the walls a lot, which is kind of like what I do, except that there are cameras. And somebody like also has a plan for us to all like go out to a club, and of course we have VIP access because we're just regular people. Like all of these things don't make sense,
Right.
but that's kind of how like social media sort of reminds me of like now everybody's like a reality television producer,
Yes.
which is not a good like that's bad. That's a bad thing.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the other piece of it is just the blatant stealing of ideas and concepts and actual words. Like the people who sort of mine, Twitter and other spaces for like funny stuff. And then they create an Instagram account where they're like, I'm the king of funny stuff. Look at this stuff other people said.
yeah,
Now, granted, like the Twitter handle's up there on the meme, but it doesn't matter. The person putting it on there is getting the following and the attention,
yeah. The
not the person who said it.
the Twitter handle is definitely like it's not like it's like oh no I gave you credit, and it's like well did you like
No, you're still taking credit. Yeah, you're
yeah, and
still.
there's no way to kind of like follow it back to because it's not hyperlinked, and I just yeah it's there's a whole ecosystem of that.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, that was a big long frustration. So now I'll get to my celebrations. I have two,
Yay,
and I did publicly celebrate them on Substack, but I'll just say them here. So one of them is reaching my 1,000 subscriber mark.
which is huge. That's really big.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I did make a point, like at the end of my little celebration post on notes, to tell people how long it took me,
yeah,
because I was like a year and 9 months and however many days. You know what I mean? Because some people think they get here and they get really discouraged, like right off the bat, when they're like, I'm doing the same thing this person's doing essentially, but they have this many and I only have this many. It's like, well, it doesn't happen overnight for the majority of people.
there's a lot of really good writers who I think are under 100 subscribers who don't have audiences or don't have very big audiences. that is not at all correlated to the quality of their work. It is a lot about like when you joined the platform, what you had when you came to the platform, like whatever online presence and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
It is not about the quality of your work. And this is a pet peeve. I know we're getting a little sidetracked, but like one of the biggest lies I think we've ever been told on the internet or like in the internet age is that like good quality stuff like wants to be found. Like it always rises to the top. That is such a load of crap.
It's the opposite. It's the attention grabby garbage that
Yeah.
rises to the top. Yeah. I'm not even going to give my second celebration because I want to move on, but it had to do with it was just one of my stories. Actually, I'll just say it real quick, but I have a story, Sweet 16, which actually won a Lunar Award, the first one ever, and then it just got an honorable mention for the Writer's Digest writing contest.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because I'm in the background. I'm doing the submissions thing, and I'm kind of leaning on contests a lot right now instead of trying to get into like lit magazines and stuff. Because the reality is, I own my own lit magazine. I mean, that's what stock fiction is. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really see a huge draw to like get in something where very few people will probably see it when I have my 1,000 people that will see it.
Can I ask you a question though about like lit magazines? And I don't know if I've ever submitted to one, but like, have you ever seen like a human being in the wild reading a lit magazine?
No,
Like
no.
I've never seen that.
It's a badge. Everything is badges now. Like my mom asked me because of the honorable mention, she's like, "Oh, we'll have to get you like a trophy case." I'm like, "There's no trophies anymore." I'm like, "They send you a JPEG. Like that's what
Huh.
you get. And that's
Yeah.
what you want." I mean, that's what we're all after, is just to have a couple little feathers for our bio cap, and that's
You know what you should do, so it's probably not helping that I'm saying this on your podcast, but you should get Denard Dale
yeah,
to create like a fake lit magazine, which is totally up his alley. He would do something like that,
right.
and then just like let it honor you again and again and again, right?
Well, I actually like invented an award for C. Smile before it actually won the Waddy Award. I called it the a felty, and like it was like a little felt heart, and it said heartfelt AF on it. And I just invented it. And then in the post that I wrote about it, I was like, all awards are made up. They're all just
Yeah.
nonsense. You know what I mean? So why not just make up your own? And then I had like a brilliant idea. I'm like, maybe I should like host the Felty Awards like every year. And like people have to send me their gushy love stories, and I get to decide who's the gushiest.
That's how it starts.
Yeah, I know, right? That's how I become the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
It's put me down for centuries. Okay. So let's talk about some stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny. We've been talking for a half an hour. I hope you're not in a hurry because I got a lot of stuff to ask you. And
I am good on time.
okay, awesome. The first question I had is about just your background, your writing background in your professional life, which is fascinating. Obviously, you did a ton of years in journalism. I don't know how much you actually worked as a lawyer, if at all, or are you one of the many people who got that law degree and never really leaned in on it? Because I know like 10 people who have done that, by the way.
For a hot minute, I worked as a lawyer, like a very, very brief period of time. I did not particularly like law school, and I kind of knew that I didn't want to be a lawyer. I graduated, I passed the bar, and I did for about 2 years. I was working as a lawyer. Most of the work though was like there's like a temp, I don't know if it exists as much anymore, but big law firms make their money on like billing hours. One way that they really bill a lot of hours on a case or on a deal, but I worked more like on the litigation side, was they basically would hire temp firms, and those temp firms would be staffed with people who had JDs and law licenses. You'd get a little bit more if you had a law license, so it was nice to have that. And you get paid an hourly rate. It sounded like a great deal. So it's basically like temp office work, except you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
And you're just doing like what they call document review. It's super boring. It is like soul crushing work. I spent a lot of time like in windowless rooms looking through documents that somebody had looked over 1,000 times before.
Yeah.
And it's just really obvious that like one side, the side that I'm working for, is just trying to run up the score, right? Because the cost of litigation goes up, and then eventually everyone's like, Jesus Christ, this costs so much, we better settle. They knew that going in, but they kind of have to like do it. I don't, it's weird. And so like it's not like I was doing anything that would like remotely feel like what a lawyer ought to be doing,
Yeah.
right? Like it it wasn't like I was like representing a human being or solving their problems or even fucking up their life. Like I was just working for a corporation or for a law firm that was representing a corporation on some litigation that had been going on for years.
Yeah.
And so it was a really soul-crushing, awful experience that paid about $100 an hour, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I found that like what my initial goal was like, oh man, I can do this and I can write like at night. That didn't really work out so well because like you spend like a 10-hour day doing that and you just like your eyes are like you can't focus. You're just like
Right.
you're just you don't feel right with the world in any way.
Yeah.
But it was like enough money where like because it was project based, I could work a couple of weeks and then I could like write for a couple of weeks. And
Hmm.
so what that allowed me to do was kind of like start pitching freelance pitching just here and there. And I started to kind of like eventually caught on. And then basically like as soon as I kind of got like a steady gig, I took a dramatic pay cut and was like so much happier.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
journalism thing though, so do you ever actually study journalism or writing at any point?
I didn't study journalism. I did write for my college paper and my high school paper. I actually covered sports in college. Like I wrote, a friend of mine was the sports editor, and he kind of knew that I was reliable enough to assign any coverage that like no one else wanted to cover.
Right.
And so which meant, and this is not a good thing, but like it meant covering a lot of women's sports,
Yeah.
which I had no problem with. I was like, actually, this is very interesting. There's a lot going on here. I covered softball. I'm a huge baseball fan, so I was like, this is a very natural thing to me. And then a lot of my friends were on the softball team anyway. So, well, at first I thought, oh, it's easy to write about them. I know everyone, so it's like it's a small school and it's
Yeah.
not hard to like call people up because also I sort of know them. But then I realized like, oh man, like now I'm calling up my friend and I'm just after they lost like 10-0. And I need a quote, right? And it's like, oh, well, what went wrong, right? And like the answer is like really obvious. It's like, well, offense and defense, pitching and hitting, both like everything went wrong,
Yeah.
right? But so like have to call up somebody that like I know and is a friend and basically confront them with their failure and extract from them a quote on deadline. That was good training.
Yeah.
As it turned. Yeah.
Absolutely. So now I'm wondering how all of that kind of led you into writing fiction specifically, because I do want to talk about Situation Normal in a bit, but like since this is a fiction writers podcast and you have written some novels, I'm curious like what kind of got that bug in your bonnet, so to speak.
I started out with this sort of like intent of like I want to be a writer, right? I didn't focus it any more than that.
Hmm.
I had always been a big fan of like movies and books, like both,
Yeah.
right? But in my head at the time that I started this, because I was like in Los Angeles, which is obviously like which where I'm from. When you say you're a writer, most people think that you're like writing for film or television here. And I think that was a sort of like the natural thing where I just started originally. I was like, oh, let me like write some screenplays. It went okay. I didn't particularly like it.
Hmm.
And what I found was that I have a lot of respect for screenwriters. I think that they do an incredible job of writing in a very small space. Like they have to be incredibly efficient.
Right.
I am not that efficient when I write. But more than that, like I don't love that. I just do not love opening up final draft. I don't also like if you're going to be a writer, you should love, I think, reading what you're writing,
Yeah.
right? Like not your work, but like in that genre or in that format.
Hmm.
Every time I opened a screenplay, I would feel like, oh, I don't want to read this screenplay. That was like a really good sign that like this is probably not for you.
Right.
And so I think out of some frustration of how that experience was going and just feeling like, oh, I'm not really kind of getting what I want out of this. And I had a job, which we can talk about in a minute, but a job that kind of came to an end. And I just started typing a novel one day. Like I opened up Word and I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna just do this. And then I just started sending pages to friends
Yeah.
and they were like, yeah, just keep going. Like this is interesting. Keep going.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how noveling started for me.
And this first novel you wrote, which one was that?
It's actually called Murder and Other Distractions. So it's not, yeah, it's not widely available. It like I think it was on Amazon. It's on Smashwords. It's on some of the other platforms. I wrote it like, and the best to sort of describe it sort of feels, I think to a lot of people, it feels a little bit kind of a little bit like an American Psycho kind of
Okay.
vibe. It is, I think it's funny. It's meant to be funny, but it's also meant to like be about a person who really is a nihilist, who really just like does not give a shit about the world.
Right.
And he's suspected of killing a former girlfriend, and it's really obvious that he's not the killer, but he doesn't really lift a finger to like save himself. He just kind of does all the wrong stupid things. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit soccer noir. It's a little bit like it's kind of early like where I was going. So I can sort of see like, yeah, it's kind of a protean kind of like Michael Estrin
Yeah.
story, but
Absolutely.
it's a lot darker and maybe a lot more vulgar than,
More vulgar?
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't wait to read it. No, that's good. I like hearing that people have things before the things, but then it makes me wonder, why isn't that thing still like in your arsenal? Is there something about it that makes you not want to remind people that it exists?
That's a good question. We can talk about this more. Like, I think you want to talk about self-publishing, and I find it to be a very challenging thing of just the mechanics of keeping that up.
Yeah.
So it kind of just more like it fell out of my arsenal. There was a moment where a real just like long shot of long shots, but a film producer had found the book, which is a really weird thing to say about a self-published novel that doesn't do a lot of business.
Yeah.
And he optioned it and he kept kind of trying to develop it into a movie, and it just never went. I think I kind of had a hope that the movie was going to sort of bootstrap the book into being more widely read,
Yeah.
and then that kind of just fell apart. And by that point, I was like, yeah, I'm on to other things. But I love the novel. I'm proud of the novel. I think it's really good.
Yeah.
I need to probably just get back to like putting it out there in some.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I'm just now like at the very early stages of like my first sort of independent publishing journey. Like my hope is to have, not my hope, I'm going to have a short story collection out in the spring. And so the marketing piece is really not my strong suit, but it's like I'm working really hard to know what I'm going to need to do. And so like one of the things that this is bringing up for me, I had an interview with Claudine Wolk, who's a marketing person. She talks about like sort of keeping everything that you have. And with self-publishing in particular, like there are a lot of ways to sort of leverage your backlist with your new stuff. So like, you know, you sell your new book for like very little and then you get people to buy or vice versa. You know what I mean? There's ways to kind of like piggyback on, it's like the more stuff you have, the more potential you have to kind of sell all of it in one go
Yeah.
rather than just piecemeal. You know what I mean? And I think about people who do the sort of model with their Substacks where like part of a paid subscription, you get like a copy of like the book that no one knows about that's back in your backlist. You know what I mean? But then you'd have to
Yeah.
get physical copies of it. There's all kinds of steps. But like I'm trying to think about those things ahead of time, like how I'm going to leverage it into my Substack because I don't have a lot of paid subscribers. If there's a way to do that, you know.
I think it's good to think about it ahead of time. I mean, at the time that I wrote this book was like 2008.
Yeah. Well, self-publishing was just different then too. I mean, it wasn't as saturated as it is now. I mean, everybody, Michael, is publishing books now.
Yeah, no.
Like this was one of my frustrations with my husband yesterday. Like it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. If they find out I'm a writer, the first thing they say is like, "Oh, I published a book." Everybody, literally. And it sucks the wind right out of my sails. I'm like, "Cool, that's great for you." Like, you know, it's hard to feel like this is what we were talking about with the Substacks, like the quality rising above the mush kind of, you know what I mean? Because the mush is sort of everywhere. And it's hard not to just get sucked down into it and feel like, well, my stuff's never going to get out of here because there's just too much. There's just so much.
Yeah.
And that's why like Amazon stresses me out. Like I really hope to avoid it. I'd love to avoid it altogether, but I feel like you can't. I feel like it has to be there for the people that only buy their books on Amazon.
Yeah, I mean, what I've noticed is that, and I'm not an expert in this at all, but when I approached self-publishing the first time with Murder and Other Distractions, it was a different world, but also I just didn't really like, I did not know what I was doing. I had some friends who made apps who helped me make the ebook.
Hmm.
We kind of put it out there, and that's kind of what it was, right? And I told people that I knew, and I told people on social media, and somehow it found a few people. Like
Yeah.
that was it, right? When I kind of like went around to publish Not Safe for Work, and there's like a longer backstory to that too, but the way I sort of looked at it was like, look, there's one version of it is you're publishing on Amazon trying to sort of like win Amazon, right? Like you're trying to like climb the ladder and in other words, like do really well in that marketplace. And that's a perfectly like noble, I don't know, noble, but it's a perfectly valid way to go about your business,
Yeah.
right? But it has its own sort of like perils and pitfalls, right? Because you're
Mhm.
kind of constantly like fighting the Amazon machine,
Yeah.
and trying to make it work for you. The other way that I think to kind of like look at Amazon and the way that I sort of choose to look at it now is, well, it's a hell of a distribution platform, meaning that like they hold the ebook copy of my book, right? That is where it is stored, right? And it's a reputable marketplace that people know. And they also do print on demand. And it's my job to kind of like find people out in the wild and like get them excited about my writing. And then I just can kind of say, like, hey, well, you could go buy it over there,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to like, I'm not trying to climb the Amazon charts. I'm just like, well, my stuff is there. And to the extent that I'm able to kind of like put it in other marketplaces, which I like, you can use like draft to digital and stuff like that. I'm not as good at like understanding how that works, but
Hmm.
like essentially, I just sort of look at it as like, well, okay, these are all the places where you just sort of made your book available,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to climb a chart anymore.
Right. So it's almost like you're not necessarily set on it being discoverable, because that's the real challenge, is for anyone who's not spending money on ads. I mean, this is what I'm learning now, this kind of stuff. It's like the reason people see the first 5 books is because they're sponsored, they're paid for.
Yeah, I have a friend from Wattpad, and she's traditionally published mystery author.
Hmm.
And I was talking to her about this, and she was like, she tried an experiment where basically like she took the money that she got from her first book and she rolled it into like Amazon ads for her, I think when her second book came out,
Hmm.
right? And basically what she found was that like if you put money in the machine, if you put $1 in the machine, you sort of get like $1.10 back to a point. So like that sounds great.
Yeah.
But then only to a point. And the point that she was trying to make was is that as she climbed those charts, she was suddenly competing against like the biggest mystery authors in the world, like real bestsellers. And their publishers are also spending money on ads. And she was like, well, now I'm in an arms race with like Penguin,
Yeah.
right? Like I cannot do that.
Right.
And so she was just like, ugh, this isn't like it doesn't kind of like lead anywhere, right? In
Right.
other words, like she felt like, and this is a person who was like, traditionally published and getting like multiple books out and in a genre that I really like and that I write in. And I also was like, I very much like look up to her, and she was just like, yeah, this is just a fucking stupid hamster wheel of an arms race that I'm in. And she was like, I need to find a way like out of that, right?
Yeah.
And she has publisher support. She has a lot of things going for her. And then made me kind of realize like, well, I don't have any of that, right? Like it's just me.
Hmm.
And so like if she doesn't feel like she can win in that fight, I don't know why I would think that I could like win in that fight. Like she at least
Right.
has like I've got bupkis, right? Like I have nothing. And so that kind of is like changed my thinking on Amazon and
Yeah.
that whole
I
yeah.
think it's good for it not to be like, because a lot of people do like the KDP thing. We don't have to get into this too much because it's just that I'm learning about it on the side. So it's popping into my
Mhm.
head. But like, there are ways that Amazon kind of pulls you in with the simplicity of how easy it is. And this is why everybody I ever meet has written a book and published it, because you can literally go
Yeah.
in there, upload your PDF, and your book is for sale. Like it takes like a day if you want to if you want to approach your
Yeah.
life's work that way. But everybody's there, and just because it's there doesn't mean anyone's ever going to find it without you pointing them to it, which is
Yeah.
what, you're using it for, is like, it's over there. And that's, ultimately why I want to have published work at all, is so I can point people to it and say it's over there.
But I think the flip side of that too is like there's the idea of like Amazon versus wide, right? That sort of that wide group is like, oh well, we don't want to be exclusive to Amazon. We want to publish everywhere else.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of like online communities of like wide writers, and they share a lot of useful information. What I found was after spending like I think 2 months there was I was like, oh, every fucking day there is like a new thing that I can be doing to game this other system,
Yep.
right? That's not Amazon. That's actually even more confusing because it's multiple stores, right?
Mhm.
So instead of one entity setting the rules, it's like 10 entities setting the rules. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like now I'm in the business, like my whole day can just be like being a hamster in some weird like e-commerce wheel. Like I don't want to do
Right.
that.
And most writers don't want to do that. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's why doing it by yourself is hard, because you don't have the hamster leader working for
Yeah.
you. You have to do it all yourself. So I'm going to jump to not safe for work, because we've mentioned it a couple times now, but we haven't gotten into it. So now we're going to hunker down on fiction writing, and particularly your genre, slacker noir, which my first question is, did you invent that genre for yourself?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. It, as far as I can tell, the term slacker noir dates back to I think like a 2010 video essay that was published in Slate.
Okay.
Uh, but the origins of it go back further. It is primarily a film genre. The classic example is The Big Lebowski,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And because in The Big Lebowski, what the genre is essentially you are marrying a a mystery slash noir, right? Like there are different types of mysteries, but noir for the most part, with a slacker or stoner comedy,
Mhm.
right? And so, like The Big Lebowski, this surprises some people to hear this, but it is essentially a Raymond Chandler novel where the protagonist is a stoner.
Mhm.
And like that's it. Like instead of trying to like solve the murder or whatever, it's like it really he's concerned about his rug. And then everything flows from this rug thing
Right.
into this larger world of like corruption and malfeasance and all this stuff
Right.
that's going on. But it's not really structurally any different from a Chandler novel.
Mhm. Gotcha.
And so I've always been drawn to the like that kind of mashup of genres.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. That's awesome. So the book itself, here's my question I wrote. Loosely based on you? Yes, question mark.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. So I had a job early on. I was a reporter at what I would call like porn's second best trade publication. We were sort of that's not being totally fair to my old employer. We were kind of the plucky upstart.
Sure.
At the time that I was working there, digital was still a new thing, right? Internet porn was still relatively new. There was still a sort of like a traditional is not the right word, but a still kind of like what I would kind of call like if you've ever seen the movie Boogie Nights, they go from sort of like film to video, and then video, we don't see this, but video then turns into DVD. That's all part of a studio system that had been around for a very long time.
Mhm.
That was sort of in the process of being really disrupted by the people I was writing about. So our competitor really had a lot of excellent coverage of the studio system, which was dying. And we had a lot of really great coverage of the internet system, which was flourishing and disrupting them. And so that was it's kind of a fun tech story, to be honest with you. Like I was not really interested in what was going on screen.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like I was kind of much more interested in the trade story that was sort of behind those stories. And so that was a job, and it's easily the weirdest job I've ever had in my life. And so I knew the minute that I think I knew somewhere like maybe like hour two of day one, like I need to stay here because there are going to be stories, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm gathering string for something. I
Mhm.
didn't know exactly what it was. And a lot of that actually kind of makes it into the book in different ways. This is not a spoiler, but the very first chapter is a pretty accurate, I think, retelling of my interview.
Yeah.
And it's a very like there's a lot of vulgarity in that scene. I had a very, very strange interview, and I still to this day don't know exactly what it was about. But my hunch is that I think that they were just trying to see if I would like be weirded out by
Or
something.
cry and leave.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, something, they were testing you. Yeah.
the attrition rate at a porn trade publication is very high.
Mhm.
It's not like nothing about it is a normal workplace. So people who might have been there for like a year, they would just quit, no notice, and you'd find out like because they didn't show up that day, or
Right.
they'd go out to lunch and never come back. Like we had a director of marketing who like borrowed a bunch of money from our receptionist and then went out to lunch, and she just did not return. And everyone was like, well, that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
And my boss was like, no, it happens. Like, I can tell you stories. So I knew that that was like a world that I wanted to write about.
Mm-hmm. And did you write about it like in any other form, like, outside of the work that you were doing before you decided to write the novel?
That's such a good question. Yeah, so I was doing in two ways. Yes. So one thing that I was doing was just sometimes while I was at work, or certainly at the end of every day, I was just sending myself like emails of what had happened that day,
Yeah.
right? Just notes,
I just
right?
have
So
to
it's like,
stop you right now and say that that is a brilliant idea. Sending yourself emails. Now, like, I want to get back to what you're saying, but like that just jumped at me as being like something I need to do because I'm not good at keeping notebooks. Like I have notebooks, but they're never where I want them when I need them. I will send myself links to things like to go back and look at, but just to be like to write the story idea down because we're all sitting with a device in our hand, most hours of the day. That was just genius. So I love that. So keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
no worries. Yeah. So those, I basically folded those into a manuscript that was basically a memoir, right?
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of creative nonfiction and memoir. I thought, okay, well, maybe this is a memoir. That's kind of how I wrote. That's basically what I wrote.
Right.
And I think I made two mistakes there. The first mistake was I was far too close to the experience while I like I was writing that. I was kind of writing the memoir as it happens, which is not how you do
No,
that.
you got to wait like 7 to 10 years to process everything and then go back, right? Is that the
Yeah.
formula?
And then the other thing was, and this is probably the second thing is sort of a function of the first thing, is that I just looking at that manuscript, there's each chapter is sort of entertaining in and of itself, but it does not hold together as a book. There is no point, right? Like it's sort of like, yeah, this like basically like normal-ish guy goes to work as a porn journalist. That's a weird job. We learn about it. We learn about this strange, weird world that he's in, and then he just quits.
Yeah.
And so it's like, who gives a shit, right?
Yeah.
And so I just kind of was like, yeah, this is probably not worthy of a memoir. But then I took as it turned out, that was a really, really good like stepping stone into the novel because I was like, oh, I have all these scenes written, right?
Yeah.
Like I have a lot of stuff and now I can kind of play with them and change them and fictionalize them. But it helped me really kind of develop the world and my point of view on the world such that when I went to like write Not Safe for Work, I felt like, yeah, I really kind of know what I want to say about the industry and that world and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and what you did by turning it into a novel, like I'm curious, you went the self-publishing route, but like, did you play at all with pitching it to agents or anything?
There's a long, like, kind of, I did not do a great job with this. When I wrote Not Safe for Work, I thought, yes, I should seek traditional publication. I did not really understand how that process works. It was a little bit earlier. It was some time ago. So I think there's actually a lot more better information online now than there used to be.
Mhm.
Right? Like I think Jade Friedman was like writing at that time, but I did not know who Jane Friedman was,
Right.
right? So it's like go find the like a credible expert, but I couldn't really like I didn't know the difference. And sitting in Los Angeles, kind of surrounded by a lot of people who are like screenwriters and producers, I kind of was like, I did not have a lot of like authors around me who were like, this is what you should do.
Right.
And so I did submit it, but I don't think I did a very good job of submitting it. And I don't think I did a very good job of describing exactly what it was. I certainly wasn't using the phrase slacker noir, so people kind of like, I'd send it to like some crime imprints and some publishers that also took submissions, like smaller ones, and they would say like, oh, well, it's too funny. And I was like, well, that's not a problem, right?
Right.
Like in my mind, that's not a problem.
Right.
But I can see how in retrospect, like I can see how they're right in the sense that like they're putting out stuff that is like for hardcore crime fans
Yeah.
and there isn't humor in them or it's very much at the margins. And I was like, well, no, I want it to be both, but I want to lead with the funny and work our way into the crime.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, we don't
We don't do that.
we don't do that.
Yeah.
So I got kind of frustrated. I let it sit for a bit. I decided to self-publish it. And then at the last minute, I was like, I'd heard about this thing called Wattpad.
Mhm.
And I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to like put it on Wattpad just, week by week or day by day or whatever it's going to do, but just one chapter at a time. Not with the eye of like that anything would come of that. I just thought I'm going to take one more pass, and hopefully there's like enough of a live internet audience there where I can kind of test my jokes a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. And just refine them a little bit and see what happens. It ended up that very few people read it. It was not a widely read book on Wattpad because Wattpadders tend to be younger. They don't show up for crime fiction. They don't know where the hell slacker noir is.
Right.
It was just, and then to the extent that anyone was interested, they were like, these are teenagers, and they're like, ooh, porn. And then they would like read like the first 3 pages of the book, and they were like, there's no sex scenes. This is lame.
Where's
right?
the porn? Yeah.
Yeah. And so they would tap out. But what happened was it got the attention of Wattpad's studio team, and that kind of told me that there was something like there for them, and that was a kind of an interesting experience. But it kind of delayed self-publishing for me, so I sort of just sat on it for a little while. We tried to develop it. It ended up not working. There were a lot of kind of like iterations of what it could be, and then I ended up just kind of, I don't think we can kind of like come to an agreement on like what this ought to be.
Right.
Mostly just because they have a vision and they have a vision, but that vision stems from a mandate of making a certain kind of movie or television show. And I saw some very good like adaptations of, not say like things that I would watch and be like, that was good. But then at a certain point I was like, my book here is like unrecognizable at this point.
Right.
And so I don't know what this does for me. And I just said, yeah, I'm not interested in that. And I just politely told them, hey, I think we're done here.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I decided to self-publish it. And that was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, was when I think I put it out. I got cold feet. I took it down and then I put it back up. So it was like a weird publishing date. So there's some time in between that too. So you can tell it's like the headline, this guy fucking sucks at self-publishing. He does not know what he's doing.
No, it's this guy is human and has the same like stress about this stuff as everybody else. That's what I'm hearing from this story.
Fair. Yes, that's true. That's such a nicer spin on it.
Yeah, I like to put nice spins on things for other people. For myself, not so much. But okay, good. So here's just a general novel writing question, because the one novel hasn't come up, and I wasn't sure if it would, but is your Waddy winner that's still over there, Peter's Little Peter.
I should point out, Not Safe for Work also won a Waddy.
Yes. Well, see, now I was going to ask you that. See, this is the problem with everyone who comes on my show, is they don't highlight their stuff. And like, I read that in your author's note when I read your book.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, he won twice? I'm like, news to me. So that's why I couldn't find your second Waddy winner, because it's not on there anymore.
That's the thing with Wattpad, is that so like while you're working with them, you have to leave it on the platform.
Yep.
And then when we parted ways, I was like, this does not belong on this platform. And like we all kind of agreed on that. Like, it's like it was not getting readership on the platform. But then once it kind of like everything else kind of fell apart, I was like, yeah, just take this down and just put it up there. And then I just didn't highlight the Waddy element. I think it's in the Amazon, like it's in the book, and I think it's in the Amazon.
Yeah,
like,
it's in the description.
stuff.
So here's a question for you. I'm gonna get, just because we're talking about Wattpad, and I have my book up there, and it's still in the first year. So like, technically it's got to stay there until my little agreement is up, and I'll probably keep it there for a little while too after that. But my question is, if I take that down to self-publish it, can I keep my badge, or are they weird about that? Like, this is the kind of stuff I don't know.
I think you can keep your badge.
I'm not sure they're going to even follow me or care, because they haven't given me a ton of attention over there since I won. So they probably won't even notice if I leave.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. And it's changed a lot over the years, I have to say. It was a much smaller place. I mean, I was always kind of, a friend of mine who writes horror described me and her and a couple other people, because it's primarily YA, right? And romance. She described us as kind of like the gremlins in the attic. and what she meant by that was basically like, there's a handful of people who like had attention from Wattpad, either for like a traditionally published book or a movie TV thing, or both, or something like that. And she was like, yeah, like we were at a WattCon together, and she was like, we had fun, like we had a great time. But like a horror writer and like a slacker noir writer like walk into like basically like a romance and YA convention is what it was. And she was just like, yeah, we are the gremlins in the attic, and they take us out when they need like they'll call when they need you.
Right.
And that's kind of been my experience with Wattpad. Lovely people, but I was like, yeah, I do not fit in here.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because yeah, I mean, my book definitely does fit, but I mean, I just put it up there and I still have like no followers. I have like 80 after almost a year and not nearly as many views as the other Waddy winners. And whatever, it is what it is. But I also don't do because the atmosphere there now is it's very much a read for read. Like if you want somebody to like pay attention to your stuff, you got to go read their novel. And I just don't have the time to do it. And the other thing is they've, introduced this new like coins system, and they have their Wattpad creators, which are basically people that they sort of pay to just churn out books for them. And those books get stuck at the top. It's kind of like it's like everything else. It's super oversaturated. And now Wattpad's trying to make money off of writers. And I don't think the writers are doing particularly well. You hear things when you're paying attention in the comments.
It's interesting because I do think that like, I don't know, Wattpad has some like good and bad to it. It was like I went to 2 WattCons. So the second WattCon that I went to, which was in New York, there was this moment where they talked about like finding a way to get writers paid on the platform. And there was, as you imagine, like they talked about that in a room full of writers, there was a lot of excitement. And I remember thinking like, well, that's great. Like that's a good thing. And now I look back on it and I'm like, well, that was the moment where the platform had to change and change in a way that didn't really benefit the community, I think, and just new writers generally, right? Because once it kind of became all about like monetizing serial fiction, they made some structural changes to their platform where discovery was really like, you want to discover something? The things that we've already like bought that you need to buy,
Yeah,
that's what you'll be discovering.
exactly.
And I understand that, like that's a business, but it just kind of closed off the weird and wonderful Wattpad.
Yeah.
And I sort of think that if I had timing is like a really important thing, and I sort of think that I benefited a lot from timing because I wasn't really a good fit in a lot of ways for Wattpad, but I came along at a moment of like weird Wattpad.
Yeah.
Like, and I can thrive in a weird community, right? And so people are like, oh, this guy's like, he's not crushing it, but he's like weird and it's interesting. So he's like, he can be the gremlin in the attic.
Right.
And that was kind of, that was kind of my experience there.
Yeah.
Because like even Peter's Little Peter doesn't put up like huge numbers compared to like what Wattpad stars really put up, right? Like it's not.
Well, and like I feel like the trend now, it's funny if you go on there and you look at like the top 10 in the US or whatever, it's like these ongoing stories. They're like episodic, and every single one of them is like they have like steamy covers, and it's like, oh, I married a millionaire son's farmer's daughter. It's like they're these weird, like there's no end to the story. They just keep going. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, how good can that be? Eventually you got to run out of I don't know, fuel for those fires, but they don't. And then sometimes weird stuff will pop up too in the top 10. Like I remember one time seeing like a collection of memes.
Yeah.
Like someone had just published a meme collection. I'm like, that's what I'm competing with. I don't know if I can hang out here that much longer, but it is what it is. And I think the timing thing is huge because I hear that from a lot of people. People have done, really well in the last 20 years on Amazon is because they started 20 years ago,
Yeah.
And so timing is kind of everything. So I want to keep you here because we're not done.
I have time, and I'm stirring this up because I'm like
no, we're
tangent spinning,
chatting.
so.
It's good. So I want to talk about Situation Normal,
Okay.
which is your Substack newsletter. So you have this statistic that you throw out all the time. Is it that you're the 56th best humor website? 57th. I'm sorry, I put you down
57th.
a notch. That was terrible of me. I thought I looked it up on your thing.
Put me up a notch.
What's that?
You elevated me a notch.
Oh, I did. That's right. 56 is higher. It's like par in golf. Okay.
Yeah.
So where does that come from, that statistic? Or did you just make it up?
Oh, I pulled it right out of my ass. It makes.
Okay. I love it. Okay.
It's funny.
That's
it's like
perfect.
I started putting it out there just like as a joke. And then I thought, oh, nobody notices this. And so I took it away. And this was a long time ago, very early Situation Normal. And some readers were like, what happened? Are you not the 57th? And then somebody like emailed me and they were like, I really hope you make it to number 1. And I was like, there's no rankings. Like there's nothing, but it just,
right.
I just kind of like started putting it back in there because I was like, you know what? My hope, my real sincere hope, is that Situation Normal sticks around long enough and the community just grows and grows that it just becomes like a weird inside joke of some sort
Right.
that like nobody on the outside understands, and even people on the inside don't understand it. But like we're just like all proud that it's the 57th most popular humor newsletter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that's great. I was suspicious that maybe that was the case, but I was just curious if it came from anywhere. And I love made up stuff like that. I have like a thing about, the whole thing with blurbs and getting like notable people to blurb your book. I'm like, I'm literally going to put fake blurbs I mean, I don't have to actually now. I actually know people that might actually blurb my book, so maybe I won't on this first one, but like I have considered that just like writing myself reviews, like because there's like a formula to them and who's going to fact check you? Like nobody.
Nobody checks anything anymore.
No,
Yeah,
you could even put a link there and like maybe two people would click on it and laugh because I've done that before. I put a fake link that goes to like a page I made up, like just to see if anyone would go there. But
yeah.
that's the kind of fun stuff you can do on the internet. But okay, I love that you made that up. So, and also congratulations on being number 57.
Thank you.
And how long has Situation Normal been alive? And again, now that I know, it's so funny when I had that moment. So I'm talking to my audience now because you and I are just talking like we're in a coffee shop right now, and I forget that there's people listening, which is good. But that I figured out where the name of your freaking Substack came from that day. I had like that moment where I was like, "Oh my God, it's Han Solo in like the best scene of Star Wars." I think I saw a T-shirt with that phrase on it, Situation Normal on it,
Yeah,
a Star Wars T-shirt, and I was like, "Boom, I got it."
it's a deep cut.
Yeah. Thanks. I love those. Your whole thing is deep cuts. Oh my God, we could jump right to branding right now, but let me just,
Yeah, I think you asked me like how long it's been around.
yeah, how long have you been doing it?
So okay, so there's an easy answer, which is about 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's existed on Substack. It has existed in some form for a lot longer, and it started on Facebook. I started just writing these like funny little vignettes because it's just slice of life humor, right? So just funny vignettes where I am the main character, something happens like when I go to the store or talk to a barista, and just put that on Facebook. People seem to like them. I actually started doing that, I want to say around 2012 or 13. So I had a lot of like material and experience when I started Substack. I didn't have a lot of readers, but I had a lot of experience writing that kind of humor.
Mm-hmm.
But I started doing it because I was kind of phasing out of journalism and my byline was disappearing from the web, and I was doing more like PR ghostwriting, and I thought like, do I even exist anymore? And I just wrote these little stories almost to like at first just to prove to myself that I existed, which is weird, like a really weird way to go about doing anything, I guess. They just kind of caught on and people liked them, but what I never knew was, you know, almost everyone, maybe 90% of the people on Facebook that are reading them, they know me in real life. And so I was like, do these stories work if you don't know me?
Right.
I could never really answer that question. I went to Substack mostly as a way of like kind of creating a platform for self-publishing because everyone was like, well, you need an email list, and that seemed like a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really sure what to put in an email, so I just was like, well, fuck it. I write funny fiction, so why not just tell people funny stories and see if that works? It sort of does and doesn't, but I just enjoy doing it. I also kind of want to see like, just do these connect at all with anyone if you don't know me? That's actually kind of been one of the more gratifying things about just my experience on Substack is that like, oh, now the overwhelming majority of my readers do not know me like in real life. So
Right.
I'm like, okay, well, these stories work, right? And
Yeah.
that it's like a confidence boost that I think I needed.
Well, they're definitely universal. And so my question to you about slice of life humor in general, because I think about my dad. He's something of a storyteller, not in writing, but he'll tell stories like it's his job. And I just recall this one evening where he told the same story like 3 times in the span of like 20 minutes.
Mhm.
And every time the details were different. So my question to you is because you're also a fiction writer, when you hear slice of life humor, you think, okay, these are nonfiction. These are like coming from his actual life. Do you play with them at all? Do you
Sure.
yeah, like because I'm,
Yeah.
you're a journalist, so obviously I think you probably have a good memory for what people said and how it was said. But like, would you still consider what you write fiction versus nonfiction?
It's a really good question. I would file it under fiction because like it's a binary, right? You have to sort of pick one or the other, fiction or nonfiction. It is not nonfiction, and I say that mostly as kind of a journalist or even somebody who is doing like memoir or creative nonfiction, because it would not hold up to fact checking, right? Like I haven't even identified the name of the barista, right? So like how would somebody even go track them down? So it's not one of those, and I'm not calling up and after I'm doing it and checking quotes and hey, is this exactly how you remember it? There's only one source. I'm the source, right? So like it's not two source, right? So there's a lot of things that just say this is closer to fiction. That said, there's not a single story on Situation Normal that is 100% fiction,
Right.
right? Like the thing that is always true is the premise, right? Like the premise of the story or what you would call the premise of the joke, that is always true. That is like, hey, I really did have an experience where my catalytic converter got stolen twice. Or I really had this experience where it took 6 or 7 weeks to install a garage door that should have taken 3 hours, right?
Right.
Like these things are true. I am then trying to like capture as much as I can out of it. I'm also trying to like edit out the stuff that we don't need that just sort of bogs us down. I'm trying to like lean on the funnier stuff. What happens though, it's kind of, and then you eliminate like a lot of transitions and stuff that you just don't need in a story.
Right.
But what's funny about it to me, and this is kind of a joke that like it only works for me, I suppose, is that sometimes people will get like really bent out of shape about some detail and they're like, that can't be true. And I'm like, actually, dude,
That's the true part.
that is a real true part. Like it's not the only true part, but that unbelievable thing that actually happened. And I always find this just kind of fascinating because like truth is stranger than fiction, and my fiction is also informed by my real life experiences. And so like
Mhm.
it's a very fluid kind of back and forth between the two. I don't make up stuff when I do journalism. Like I
Right.
understand rules, but like when I'm writing just sort of stories for entertainment, if it's true, I'll use it. If it's not true, I'll use it. Like I will put all of these things together. With Situation Normal, I'm trying to start with a basically true story and a true structure. And then if I'm making stuff up, it's to kind of make it work as a story,
Right.
as opposed to just like, oh man, you wouldn't like reading it if I didn't, right?
Well, it's kind of like what you said about Not Safe for Work. Like when it started as a memoir,
Yeah.
you're like, this is all really cool little things that happened to me, but how is it holding together as a
Yeah.
cohesive story that people want to follow from beginning to end?
Yeah, and I always find that kind of work interesting, but also like just I'm not great at making up a story out of whole cloth. Like I sort of have to experience it, live it. I have to approach it in a kind of journalistic memoirist sort of way
Yeah.
before I can kind of turn it into something that anybody would want to read. And so like in a lot of ways, that's Situation Normal is not. It is different than Not Safe for Work, but the process is very similar.
Yeah. That's cool. So I'm guessing, yeah, you don't write a lot of like sci-fi romantasy stories.
The only story that I've written that was like 100%, okay, well, it's almost 100% fiction, is Peter's Little Peter,
Yeah.
which is a story on Wattpad that won Watty, and it is about a teenage boy who is obsessed to an unhealthy degree with the size of his penis, and he thinks it's too small, and it somehow the school finds out, and basically he kind of gets bullied for like having a small penis, and hilarity ensues. And there's only one true like it happened part, and that is I think the very first scene in the book is something that did happen to me, which was like health class. I think I was like in 10th grade, and for whatever reason the teachers gave us like vegetables and condoms, and they paired us up, boys and girls, right? Which is like way to
Yeah.
make it super awkward. And it just was like I was sitting next to this girl, and it wasn't like a girl that I liked or anything like that. It was just
Right.
a girl, and they're handing out condoms and phallic looking vegetables like zucchinis and bananas and stuff. And like they just hand me a vegetable that is just like smaller than everybody else's. And I'm immediately like I just was like, oh, and I didn't say anything, and she just was like, it's so small. And I was like, oh my God, this is so fucking awkward. And just the awkwardness of that always just stayed with me. And I was like,
Right.
what a terrible way to teach children about safer sex is to like make it as awkward as possible. And I
Yeah.
just
At
thought,
least make all the vegetables the same size or similar.
yeah, something. I don't know. But like I literally was just like, that's kind of a funny scene.
Yeah.
And so that's a true scene that happened to me. That was essentially the starting point of Peter's Little Peter. Then a lot of fiction just came right out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have it on my reading list. I'm actually very interested to read it. So I'll let you know what I think when I get through it. Okay. I've had you here for so long. I feel like I have to let you go, but let's just like take 5 minutes because I mentioned branding at the top of the episode, and I feel like we've sort of hit on it a little bit. And most recently in your post about the film Hitman, you said something in there that kind of pulled me back to the whole branding thing. And this goes back to the authenticity thing too.
Mhm.
And just like what we're trying to do now as writers, because you can't just be a writer anymore. You have to be a personality on top of that. You don't have to, but there's a real pressure to do it, to be in front of people in the way that is going to get them to buy your books, I guess. So you had a thing that you said in there that was, the lesson is that we owe it to ourselves to be ourselves. And I have another quote from my teacher because I'm taking a class right now. And her quote was, because they kind of go together, was, if you're able to be yourself, then you have no competition. Because I think what happens is, and this goes back to like my beef with Instagram and then what people are doing, they're kind of like emulating other people in the way they do it. They're like, oh, well, this is getting attention, so I'm going to behave this way. Or this kind of writing gets attention, so I'm going to write this way. But the reality is, if you just do you, as they say,
Yeah.
nobody else is going to do that. There's just no way.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm curious what you're feeling about like the word branding. It makes a lot of people cringe, including me, because it feels like a job that you're supposed to do instead of just making your art or your craft. So like, where are you on it now? And is it something that you think about or have thought about? Just give me your hot take on that.
It's something that I've thought about. There's a lot of agony there. You know, for me, the big struggle with branding, it's a little bit about what you touched on, which is just being something that's like not true to you. To me, that just feels like some people, I think they think that that feels like phony or like you're lying. Maybe to me, it sounds exhausting and unsustainable.
Yes.
Right? It's like I can't be that person for very long. Like I don't know. It just doesn't seem to work.
Right.
But the thing that I really struggle with branding is, you know, a brand is kind of, particularly like an author brand, it is a sort of like, it's a useful thing because hey, it tells you very quickly like who this person is and the kind of work that you might expect from them.
Mm-hmm.
Where I get into trouble is I like to do a lot of different things. And those things all, as we've kind of mentioned, they all stem from me and my experiences, right? And so it's like, okay, well, what do you do with that? Like, I struggle to sort of say, oh, my brand is some version of like crime writer or even just like slacker noir, which is more specific, so that's more useful. Because if you sort of like label yourself as just that, then you eliminate all of the slice of life humor, or vice versa.
Right.
And so I have always kind of struggled to say like, okay, well, what is the like the unifying brand that sort of like puts it all together? I don't know what the answer is. I find it.
Oh, I thought
I
you were going
find
to give me an answer.
no, I find it incredibly like frustrating. But
Yeah.
the best way that I can kind of describe it is, and this is not a way that like comes across, I think, necessarily to readers, but it's useful to me at least in terms of like figuring out like what I'm gonna write, is I just kind of always ask myself, and this is like a baseball way of thinking about it, but like, is that a pitch I can hit? Meaning, like, there are pitches that like you can take a swing at and you may or may not put the ball into play and something good or bad might happen, but there are other pitches that are your pitches where you just know if you put a clean swing on that, it's going a long way. And my feeling is like those pitches, like that's kind of concentrated like in your brand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I guess I sort of think of my brand as like, this is a little bit off the top of my head, but essentially it's like, yeah, if there is a kind of like, if there is a humor that stems from my just like personal life experiences, right? So it's sort of, you know, it's people kind of, there's a term of like metafiction, which isn't quite what I do, but
Right.
like somewhere in that zone of like, yeah, like if this happens to me and I feel comfortable talking about it, which usually I do, it's fair game to like turn into a humorous story of some form or another.
Right.
My theory of the case is essentially that like if you kind of get to know me through one of those many avenues, you just kind of get into it and you're like, you know what? I'm just here for Michael Estrin stories. And like ideally, if enough people just know that, they're like, well, that's a brand. It's just a Michael story. And you could read it blind without knowing who it was and be like, yeah, no, that's a Michael story. And that to me is like where I'm trying to go.
And I think what we should figure out is that we're already going there. Like my thing with branding is it always seems to be on the part of the writer to figure out what their brand is, but I think it makes more sense for your readers to tell you what it is because they're the ones that are showing up with the expectation that you're delivering on. Like I had a quote from Jane Friedman because I attended a webinar a while back on this. She had a guest talk about it. And it said, brand is about how you and your work are perceived. In a word, brand is expectation. And you said the word expectation a minute ago. So it's like, I feel the same way about my stories. Like people have actually said in the comments, like, if your name wasn't on this, I would have known it was yours.
Yeah.
And like, what else can you do? That's like all you can do is just show up and write the way you write and be who you are. I think it's harder for fiction writers too, because I'm not always sure that the branding is helpful for them. And it's because of the thing that you just said, which is it sort of boxes them in terms of like spreading their wings into different arenas and trying different things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think it's a little more damaging, I think, to creatives than to say a nonfiction writer who's writing books about business or something. Like I could see the need for a brand sticker on that. Like these are why my business books are different because ABC.
There's a really good like high profile example that's kind of like worth mentioning there, right? Because if you think about like Stephen King, immediately people are like king of horror, right? Like he's just tops in horror.
Yep.
Well, he also is actually a very good and accomplished and very good selling crime writer, right? He also writes crime fiction. A lot of people know him, like people who are crime fiction fans, like know about his crime fiction, but the world kind of is like that's the horror guy, right? Like he is tops of that game. And what a brand to have, right? But I think probably also might think, yeah, but like, did you know that I do this other thing that's not horror and I'm excellent at it? And they do really good books and I'm really proud of them. And I don't know how to like, I mean, he doesn't have any problem telling people that everything is out there. Like people find him. I'm not worried about Stephen King.
Right.
But I guess my point is that like, he's also just an example of somebody who is really, really known for one thing, but also like contains multitudes. Like
Yep.
I think most of us.
Yeah, because I wouldn't think most people who are reading you think that's Michael Estrin, the novelist, but
Yeah.
you've written a handful of novels. So technically you are that. Yeah. People are going to pick the thing that connects them to you and that's going to be their thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in the slice of life story when you're like, you start calling people by their pneumatic devices. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you have an association with a writer and it's like, he's this guy, you know. For me, you're just Han Solo. See, that's where that comes in.
Would that I could be that cool.
You're super cool.
But no, I'm just like cool enough to steal his best line. That's
but
it.
that's all right though. But you wear it well. The Han Solo vibe.
I definitely don't wear the Han Solo vibe very well.
I don't know, Michael. We've been here for 90 minutes. I feel like I took up your entire, well, it's your morning, it's my afternoon, but I really appreciate you being here. My family just got back. They ran away so I could do this with you and they just came back. So I'm going to go address them.
Yes, go address those people. All right.
I will. All right, Michael. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
No problem.
I don't care if you believe me. Fire is coming, fire is coming. Birds of the meadow, birds of the meadow. Fire is coming, fire is coming. Birds of the meadow, birds of the meadow.
Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, rating, or review, depending on where you're listening, or by sharing this podcast with your favorite people. Stock Fiction is a dynamic anthology of short fiction, essays, poetry, humor, and multimedia experiments written and produced by me, Meg Olders. If you're into the stuff I'm making, or you're just into supporting the dynamic individual who makes it, I hope you'll consider becoming a free or paid subscriber today. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.